Hello and welcome to the latest Levelling Up Goals seminar. Today we're going to talk about harnessing the energy transition, and this is being held in partnership with BP. Well, let me introduce our panel to you. As ever, I'm joined by Justine Greening, former Secretary of State for Education, Transport and International Development. And of course, Justine has been the leading light in the Levelling Up Goals movement. And we're also joined by Kerry Dryburgh, who is Executive Vice President of People and Culture at BP. She's a Levelling Up Commissioner for Goal 13, which is what we're talking about today, harnessing the energy transition. And Robbie Moore is the Parliamentary Chair of Levelling Up Goals. He's a Conservative Member of Parliament for Keighley and Ilkley in West Yorkshire. And John Woodcock, Lord Walney, as he is now known. I can't get used to that, I'm afraid, John, but there we go. Former Labour MP for Barrow-in-Furness, sits as an independent member of the House of Lords and is an advisor to Boris Johnson's government. Well, what does harnessing the energy transition mean? Justine, do you want to just lead us into the conversation?
Yes, thanks, Ian, and great to have brilliant panel. Looking forward to the discussion. This is really a crucial levelling up goal because there are two big challenges facing our country, probably the whole world, but certainly our country. One is how do we achieve net zero? The second is how do we level up Britain? And actually they are almost two sides of the same coin. It is about planet and people. So far, I think there's been a huge amount of focus on net zero, and we've increasingly understood the role that business plays in helping us get to net zero. And of course, BP is a company that is right at the center of how we'll manage to do that successfully. But I think what we're also steadily realizing is that the private sector and companies like BP are also right at the heart of not only how we deliver on net zero, but also how we deliver on levelling up as well. And I think that's the interesting discussion for us to have today, not just about, if you like, the energy mix transition and how that's shifting, but also what it means for infrastructure, what it means for energy consumption and the affordability challenges around that. But of course, behind that, the levelling up piece of all of this is around the opportunities that this massive transition of our economy is going to be opening up as we see the economy steadily become much more of a green economy that delivers on net zero. I mean, there's some estimates that we could have, even by 2030, 700,000 green economy jobs just here in the UK. By 2050, there are estimates it could be around 1.2 million. So these are massive opportunities being created. If we can have them in the right places, if we can extend them to the right people, then it's an amazing chance to level up Britain as we go through this transition. And that's what we're talking about with Goal 13. And I think the last piece or reflection I've got on all of this is the parallels with climate change are really fascinating to me on levelling up, because we're doing work with some sectors on levelling up that almost have to retrofit. So if we're talking about the legal profession, this is a profession that's got almost all the legacy challenges of the fact that Britain isn't a country that's traditionally had equality of opportunity. So I think there are some sectors that are really having to retrofit, just like we're seeing on climate, but there are these new sectors, including the green economy, where because we haven't really had these opportunities before, they have the chance to be leveled up from the word go. And I think that's what's so exciting about the green economy. And as it grows, if we can succeed in doing that, then we really will have grabbed the chance, not just, if you like, take care of our planet long term, but also to achieve this issue of equality of opportunity. So yeah, it's a crucial goal.
Kerry, let's come to you. The challenges that face a company like BP from having to effectively transition from one sector to a whole new world, I guess, are immense. You could probably talk for the next hour just on that subject, but just outline briefly what the challenges that BP has faced over the past decade and what the challenges are for the next decade.
Thanks, Ian. And I think for us, just to say harnessing the energy transition is really about making sure we mitigate any of the adverse impacts of a low carbon transition for people at work and also for the communities in which we operate, but at the same time balancing that with promoting what we would call sustainable opportunities for individuals and communities as the low carbon industry evolves and develops. And you know, what does that mean for us and companies like us? Well, the way we're choosing to describe it is really ensuring that we can present opportunities for what we call decent work, supporting those livelihoods and creating, you know, positive well-beings. And that in itself is a huge challenge, because we need to do that in a way that creates low carbon job opportunities, and we're doing it in some of the communities we operate in already. So you may be aware of the work we're doing on Teesside, for example, with our H2 Teesside project, and also some of the bids that we've made. So we submitted a bid only just last week, in fact, for a ScotWind project. So there's lots of new opportunity, but what does that mean? It means also we need to reskill and we need to evolve some of the roles and opportunities in our company and in the supply chain. But at the same time, we have a challenge because there will be, you know, oil and gas roles needed for the long term too. So it's balancing the new with the old, and how do you transition some of those opportunities and skill sets, but at the same time retaining that level of talent you need, because it is no black and white transition. You know, we need to continue producing oil and gas for a number of years to come as well.
Reputationally, that's quite a challenge, isn't it, to persuade people that you're not just an oil company any longer. They still see the BP logo on all the petrol station forecourts, but you do so much more than that now. Is that quite a difficult thing to achieve?
I think it's always going to be a challenge. You know, we have our history and we are evolving, but there are increasing platforms in which we're talking about our transition. So, you know, the reality is we're transitioning from what we used to call an international oil company to an integrated energy company. And we're doing that in partnership with stakeholders. We're doing it for our shareholders and with our employees. And, you know, that's a huge, huge transition. And we're talking about that through our purpose. So our new sustainability framework, and certainly we're talking about that in terms of our new strategy. So I think, you know, it is a challenge, but there are increasing proof points around the transition and all of the work we're doing. So, you know, I've mentioned Teesside, ScotWind. There are projects we're working on with Aberdeen, for example, to transition some cities like Aberdeen and others around the world to achieve a net zero achievement or net zero goal as well. So I think, you know, for me, you can talk about these things in many different ways on many different platforms, but the key is really showing and proving that we're in that transition and we're making progress. And we're doing that through a number of proof points, whether that's through the number of gigawatts of renewable energy we are developing in the pipeline, or whether it's these projects that I've mentioned, offshore wind projects as an example. You know, there are many proof points that we're evolving and will continue to do so.
Robbie Moore, what does this phrase "harnessing the energy transition" mean to you, and how effective can government be in implementing this transition? I mean, is it a case of offering incentives? Is it a case of new legislation? What does it all mean to you?
Well, I think the whole levelling up agenda is, of course, about rebalancing the economy. And as part of this levelling up goal, it's looking at how that energy transition happens between those traditional methods that we're all used to more renewable energy methods, and looking at hydrogen, looking at new technologies coming along. And it absolutely is vital for organisations like BP and others to be looking at more of an integrated approach, as Kerry has just said. And of course, my role as an MP is all about policy and making policy work. And I think the government can do that by providing certain incentives for organisations that are in the driving positions like BP and others, to provide incentives for them to look at new integrated measures, look at new technologies coming through, providing space and the facilities for those projects to happen in, like in Teesside, for example, as Kerry has just suggested, through providing the likes of free ports and those sorts of organisations which deliver on trade, but also deliver on new technologies as a space for those technologies to develop. But also look at the stick approach as well, I suspect, in terms of bringing out policies that encourage energy companies to actually look at providing the cost of energy at a cheaper rate, and also making sure that consumers have the ability to understand how their energy is being produced before signing up to contracts to consume it.
And John, from your point of view, harnessing the energy transition, give me your definition of what that means in terms of the levelling up agenda.
It's fascinating what BP is doing in a community like Aberdeen, which of course has been its entire growth has been based all around oil for very many years, and the responsibility that I think BP is rightly showing to a community like that, which sees the change which is coming. There's obviously a fierce debate about the speed of that change and the nature of that change, but it is unquestionable that life and the opportunities that have been in Aberdeen, communities like that for very many years, are going to change profoundly and are already changing. So that sense that, you know, you see communities right across the UK, and mine in Cumbria, which has been down the road from civil nuclear energy for many years, and the Sellafield nuclear power station is going there, and it looks like it is not being replaced by a power station project of a similar size. And this is massively dislocating for many thousands of high-skilled workers. And so, you know, that sense of MPs, when I was the MP here, you'd be banging on the door of the government and saying, okay, look, what are you going to do to help? But actually seeing leadership from companies like BP, who are changing their own what their own base project and raison d'etre is going to be, but seeking to take a community with them so that they value they're able to take advantages of those new opportunities is fundamentally important.
We've talked a lot about new opportunities. I think it was you, Justine, who said, well, there could be 700,000 new jobs. How do we make sure that those jobs go to the areas that they really need to go to if we are to take the levelling up agenda seriously? Kerry, let me come to you first on this. Where do you see these new jobs coming from? And do you think that they will be in the areas that most need them?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I mean, I think just first of all, in terms of areas of the country that most need this work, I mean, I think the pandemic itself has actually opened many companies and many individuals' views and eyes to how we can work very differently. So I think in that regard, first of all, there's a different basis on which we're looking at where work gets done now in a way that perhaps traditional companies and industries may not have in the past. And as I mentioned earlier, the reality is we need to build new skills, we need to transition and reskill individuals, and we need to hire because there will be jobs that we need to fill. And we need to do that in many different ways, whether that's, you know, through all ends of the spectrum, whether it's from communities that are perhaps disadvantaged today, right through to the other end of the spectrum, pulling graduates out of the university system as well. So I think the reality is we need to look at different access points for that talent, whether it's through apprenticeship programs. And just taking Aberdeen as an example, we've had an apprenticeship program in Aberdeen for our oil and gas business for many years. That's just been a way of working. But actually through the ScotWind project, we potentially would be starting a new apprenticeship program to bring in talent into that initiative. And I think the key is, how do you create access to those opportunities right across the country from different different communities. And so for me, I think that's about how do you get into the education system so that you are doing everything you can to convey to different individuals and communities those opportunities and how to access them, as well as working in partnership with other operations and other initiatives. So we do some work, as an example, with the Prince's Trust, and we've just recently created access into our retail network for individuals coming from the Prince's Trust that might otherwise not have had an opportunity to access those kinds of jobs. So for me, it's now a question of how do you maximize those partnerships and how do we access different communities and individuals so that they can see that and see what opportunities there might be and how they can take advantage of them. And that's going to be about sort of getting out into the communities, raising awareness, working with schools, working with other organizations. And we've done it historically. So just from a BP standpoint, this is something we've done in many communities in which we've operated historically. We've worked in Mexico. We've taken opportunities out to communities there, Brazil, Indonesia. We've created industries from scratch. So I think it's now about us replicating some of that in different communities right across the UK.
And if you identified where some of those might be?
There's still, I think, work to do on that, Ian. We are obviously working very actively on our plans for Teesside. We're working very actively on our plans with the ScotWind project, and certainly we have a number of opportunities through educational partnerships to access different communities. So AFS, for example, we're about to offer the opportunity for 150 sort of younger people through the AFS network that we have in Aberdeen and some of the communities in which we operate. So there are a number of initiatives, and I think we will be really working to build those out right across the UK.
I thought I was going to get an exclusive there. You were going to give me all of the different parts of the UK.
I was going to say, Kerry, there's a great site just up the way from me in West Cumbria. If you fancy turning your attention to civil nuclear, I'm sure you could pick it up. I mean, difficult.
Open to all ideas, John, for sure.
Well, John, just on that, it seems to me, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but from reading around the subject, it seems that the sort of north and northeast is the area that really has the opportunity to effectively replicate the sort of Cambridge-Oxford corridor in technology and become maybe the area of the United Kingdom that specialises in the green economy. There are lots, I mean, a lot of inward investment could be attracted to that region, which, let's face it, it needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a compelling way of putting it, and you know there are certain geographical factors, but mainly it's about the people. It's about the extraordinary base of skilled talent that you've had built up from engineers and across a range of disciplines working in traditional energy sectors, who now it makes sense on a number of different levels to ensure that they are the critical part of the future. One, in terms of preserving, improving communities, because frankly, if you don't find alternative ways of means of employment for settlements which are built up around a particular industry, those communities suffer greatly. But even more important than that, from the point of view of UK PLC, it makes absolute sense. There's a necessity to make sure that those skills are not lost, that people don't go off into retirement or in employment, and that means taking that really active approach to what the future of energy is going to be, which BP is clearly grappling with. I want to see the government showing greater leadership on, but founded on that base of many thousands of perfectly skilled people that could transition into another field of energy.
Robbie, geographically, you're closest to that region. Do you detect a real opportunity there?
Huge opportunity, Ian. And I represent Keighley in West Yorkshire, which is very well known for its strong manufacturing, engineering, tech based sectors that it's been operating in for years. And there is a real hunger from many businesses across the West Yorkshire region and that wider geographical area to utilise, as John was saying, that skill set. And for those businesses to adapt to these new markets that are coming through. This levelling up goal that we're talking about is a huge sector that many businesses will be able to adapt their offering, their skill set to for many generations to come. And I think that's a great job opportunity, but also about engaging local communities in having ownership of this journey. I also represent a community which is highly tuned to making sure that when we are talking about recovery from the pandemic and our transition towards making sure that we reach that net zero target, that we are acutely minded to the environment and mitigating the negative impacts through any energy generation that is produced, that it doesn't have a big impact on the environment. And it's about bringing communities on that journey and making sure that we've got the right skill set that is meeting that in the geographical areas that we can build on that are already offering or meeting those markets, but building on that and reskilling and upskilling those communities like Keighley in West Yorkshire.
And Justine, if you look at the Northeast as an area, it's actually doing really well in green jobs at the moment, I think. But how important is it for local government leaders, mayors, regional leaders to come together to try and really launch almost a PR initiative to say, yeah, the Northeast can be the home of our green revolution?
I think what always helps drive investment is when companies looking at a region can have a sense of an existing game plan. The role, I think, for government on this is making sure that the enabling environment is there. And I think if you're in national government, that means probably the overarching policy framework, the investment. I think if you're in more regional and local government, it probably means making sure the skills are there at a local level to be able to take advantage of opportunities that might come your way. And it's been really interesting listening particularly to Robbie and John talk about what it might mean at a regional level. And you always have this sense of, places in the country, like where I grew up in South Yorkshire, they were right at the centre, if you like, of an original industrial revolution and the energy source that powered that, which was coal and steel industries. And now have the chance to be right at the centre of a brand new one, but actually also recognising that places like the Humber region, for example, can be part of it, because that new energy transition is also about renewables and offshore wind and all of that. Aberdeen, similarly, you've got the old rigs, and all of the carbon capture and storage agenda, all of that. So actually it does all come together, and there is, in terms of the levelling up agenda in the communities and what's going to happen on that energy transition, a really direct, a proper overlap genuinely between those communities that were at the centre of the original energy mix and the fact that they can be at the centre of the next one. So it is genuinely a really exciting time. And what we do now need, I think, is innovation on what businesses like BP are doing, building on everything that they've historically done, but also this sense of how you get those partnerships working at a more regional level, as you say, Ian, with mayors, with local authorities, because I think if you can work out a smart model on that, then I think, you really get a lot of change, actually probably a lot faster than maybe we've all anticipated.
John, how can we get local buy-in to this kind of agenda? Because you still got people, it wasn't that long ago that David Cameron described the green agenda as sort of green mumbo jumbo, or words to that effect. How can you get particularly younger people interested in the whole green jobs mission? And how can you stop the suspicion of I mean, companies like BP, who that they will just see as big oil companies and effectively the enemy of the green agenda, which Kerry, you come back on that in a second. But I think you'll agree that is how big energy companies, not just oil companies, are seen. So that the governments and education authorities have got a job of work to do here, but obviously so have the energy companies.
Yeah, it's a critically important question, and I think, I mean, actually, the issue is less, I think, with young people. If you're going to talk about different ages, who I think tend to buy more readily, and it tends to be older age groups where the level of convincing needs to be greater. I think part of the answer is a stark and perhaps a grim one, in that, you know, we look at what is happening to our climate here in the UK and across the world, but in neighbouring nations like Germany recently with the floods, and it is harder and harder to pass that off as unrelated to the damage that we are doing to the climate. So I'm afraid that sense of urgency, the need to act, we need to take the lesson of what is happening around us before our eyes and translate it into greater action, more urgent action. And yeah, look, I mean, Kerry will know better than any of us the baggage that BP and other fossil fuel companies are going to take around with them. But you know, that's their responsibility, but it's also their opportunity. You know, ultimately, if they are able to show the scale of genuine change, then in time their reputation will change. But much more importantly than that, you know, it is possible for companies like BP to lead the way and show the change that is needed for the rest of us. And frankly, if you are looking at this and not really paying much attention, kind of broadly worried about what this is going to do to your household bills, which I think is an inevitable worry. I mean, there's only so far, I'm afraid, that we can get by telling people well, they're going to get cheaper energy and we're going to do all of this change and everything's going to be fine and the taxes are going to be low. But if you're looking at that with a sort of level of skepticism, if you see BP changing, then you think, oh well, look, this is really serious. We've got to do it. If I could really quickly, because Justine grew up just down the road from me. I was in Sheffield. She was in Rotherham. I was born in a former pit community, and the fundamental mistakes which were made. Yes, back in the 1980s with the then Conservative government not doing enough or hardly doing anything to help those communities to change, but also actually by the Labour government that then came in, which was prepared to invest a great deal more, but on the basis of regeneration and making communities sort of, you know, crudely making them look nicer, whereas it wasn't based, really, it didn't do enough to create the different employment streams which are fundamentally needed for communities to be able to change and grow and to prosper, which is where we can do better through this new energy transition. And bluntly, we have to do better for all of those areas.
Kerry, do you find any real resistance to the message that you're putting out at the moment? And do you think that there are lessons to learn maybe in allied sectors? I mean, you look, for example, at the energy supply sector, where you've got companies like Octopus and OVO and one or two others, who I think have transformed the reputation of energy supply to the consumer. And you've got sort of companies like the older energy companies like EDF and whatever, who I think people still see as being very customer unfriendly. And OVO, Octopus, and as I say, several of the other new entrants, everyone understands that they have a more of a green agenda, and they're giving their customers more of a chance to go onto green tariffs and explain what they are. Are there any lessons to learn there?
I mean, I think there's always lessons to learn. Companies like ours and other industries that have been through huge transitions, you know, none of us have all the answers. And the reality is it's all about partnership, working with government and other industries and organizations to find our way through this challenge. I mean, we're talking about, one of the biggest challenges of our lifetime in terms of, getting to net zero. And of course, there's skepticism too. Regardless of generation, there are people who are very much behind the ambition that we have as a company and our strategy and goals, and there are other people that are very skeptical about that, and that's natural too. As I said before, I think the key here is really delivering on what we say we are going to do and showing progress, because you can say everything you want, but if you don't deliver on it, then at the end of the day, that doesn't get you anywhere. So it's about being really clear in my mind and transparent about the goals that we have and getting to net zero, growing our low carbon business, growing other aspects of our business, and working in a way that I think is integrated. Because, we believe that it's companies like ours who have the ability to work in an integrated fashion right across the value chain, and with partners who will help enable this transition. And I think that's what's important.
Justine, the strap line under this this levelling up goal says, ensure that the energy transition is fair and creates opportunities across the UK. I mean, those are nice words, but a lot of people will say, well, look, there are lots of good jobs in the energy sector that aren't necessarily green jobs. How can we be sure that with this transition into a new world, that those jobs are going to be replaced by better jobs and more jobs?
Well, there's two parts of this, isn't there, really? We've talked a lot about almost the energy transition itself and how much of a profound change that is for a company like BP. But actually, if it grabs the opportunity and it really looks at levelling up with the new roles, then actually it can make a big difference in precisely in the places where actually we really want to see more opportunities. There's then, of course, almost the rest of the company. And I know that, one of the things that Kerry's really focused on as well internally within BP is its diversity and how it really can, take away some of the barriers around recruitment. And as Kerry's alluded to, looks at really different entry paths into what is an amazing company with huge opportunities for people who are part of it. So, it's almost my retrofit part of what I was talking about right at the beginning. There's also the bit about, for everything else that is still going along, actually, how can that become more open to more people? And it's one of the reasons why we've really welcomed working with BP, because it is a leader. And, as Kerry says, it will effectively have a massive impact on not just its own sector, but I think wider corporate Britain in terms of the fact that it's genuinely challenging itself to say, okay, where do we fit in now? And how do we change our whole company, as well as, if you like, the bits that are so impacted by the energy transition?
All of you seem to be united in thinking that the whole net zero agenda does provide opportunities for levelling up. But Robbie, in terms of translating that into what it means for local people, how do you explain that locally? How do you get people enthused for this agenda?
Well, I think there is a huge enthusiasm anyway at the moment, as people are inevitably talking more about the environment, more about that net zero agenda. And I know in my constituency, for example, in Ilkley, there are very active campaign groups and who are lobbying me hard, but also coming up with really positive suggestions about how at a local level businesses can adapt and change their skill set, their offering, but also how it can impact that hierarchy of the supply chain. It's once you get one company on board in terms of changing their offering and their skill set, it inevitably drops down through their hierarchy of procurement process and some of those bigger jobs that are likely to be delivered at a local level. And I think widening out from West Yorkshire, it's about, as we touched on earlier, local leaders, at that devolved government level, our local mayors taking much more of an ownership of this agenda as well, and really championing our areas within the devolved regions about what our offering is and how we at that regional level can feed into the net zero agenda, but also working with and having a clear strategy about how can local government and national government work with business and work with education providers to make sure that, yes, we have that clear strategy from a skills perspective and a jobs perspective, but they're all working in harmony with one another. Because whilst the deadline is set for 2050, it's not that long away if we are talking about getting every sector of our economy on board with this huge transition.
I'm going to ask you all this question. If we're all agreed that net zero provides lots of opportunities for new jobs in all sorts of different areas of the country, particularly the energy sector, how can we measure what's happening? How can we measure whether it's been a success, whether these jobs are as plentiful as everybody seems to think, and where they're being created? John, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it prompts. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I think it should be. We should be thinking along the lines of. If you look at the Climate Change Committee and the role that it has in measuring the nation's progress towards net zero, measuring the level of resilience that the country has against adverse weather, against climate change. You know, there is a third strand which I think we probably need to do better at, and there is I think a role for government or governance within this to track the level of change more than we're doing in terms of the kind of new jobs that are being created and the areas in which they are being created, because it is not going to be easy. And you know, I think that politicians have a responsibility to also to talk about the difficulty of the change, but why it is necessary. But part of being able to talk up the opportunities is, as you say, in showing it in a more granular way about the areas that are benefiting from job changes. And you know, this is part of what the levelling up goals is, of course, seeking to do. It's seeking to give proper metrics to that companies are leading on, to be able to work with government, but to show government actually, you know, these are areas of change that are being measured. It's fundamentally important, and we need more action on it.
Kerry?
Thanks, Ian. I mean, I think it's fundamentally a critical goal that we need to look at, and that's why I agree with John that the work that Justine and the team are doing around levelling up is really important here, and holding companies to account. So as I think about companies like mine, as we think about how you are creating, I think, some measurement around gross jobs, so the increase in jobs in different geographies around the country, and the nature of those jobs, so the types of skills those jobs require, and the access opportunities, so the mechanisms that we're drawing talent into those jobs from, whether that's apprenticeships or through other academic, educational outcomes, and just thinking about how you hold companies to account around reporting on those sorts of roles, I think is critical. I mean, I think this is about a partnership between education, government, and companies like BP.
And do you think that there is a role for government in, I don't know, just as Theresa May's government put in legislation, in fact, it may have been Justine that did this, I don't know, put in guidance for big companies to say, well, how many women are on the boards of companies, or that sort of thing. Do you think that there is a role for government here to say to companies in the energy sector, well, what are you doing in terms of creating new green jobs, and where are they happening?
I think that's to be debated, Ian. I think you're referring to Hampton Alexander and the impact that Hampton Alexander has had on companies like ours and others in the FTSE around gender representation on the board. I think the principle of how you hold companies to account around this is an important one. I think practically, it would be good if companies like ours, who have a particular purpose in mind, are really motivated to progress this agenda themselves. I think, it's one thing to mandate from a government standpoint, but I think really this is about companies driving this agenda to get the best possible outcomes for society in general, and that's incumbent on us all.
I'm going to ask you a question now where you'll have to walk a tightrope in the answer, but when all of the subjects that we've been discussing today are discussed at high-level meetings that you're involved in, is there any resistance to this at all?
I think I would just say very positively, we set out a new strategy, a new purpose, and a new ambition back in February 2020. Bernard Looney, as our chief executive, he was very much, crystallizing that new strategy, and we actually appointed a new leadership team at the same time, of which obviously I'm now a part. So I think everybody at the senior levels of our company believes this is the right thing. This is what we're here to do, and for one, this is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I think, as I said earlier, it's one of the biggest challenges we have to deal with in our lifetime, and to feel that we're able, and I'm able, to be a part of making that transition and that change is extremely fulfilling.
There's a role in politics whenever you want it, Kerry.
I remember.
Robbie, about how we measure whether this is working or not, whether it's happening or not, what are your suggestions for how we do that?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna take it right back to that ultra local level, and probably use the phrase that I started off this conversation with, which was, it's about the levelling up agenda is all about rebalancing economies and making sure that an individual, no matter where they're living within the UK, is feeling that difference over a period of time. And when we're specifically talking about this goal, what steps is that individual taking to change their daily habits, their daily routine that addresses those steps towards getting to net zero, and how do they understand they're doing that? So therefore, do they understand where their energy is coming from and how it is produced, and then therefore how they're buying it, and what steps are they taking on a day-to-day basis, whether it's the nature of simply the car that they own and how that car is being fueled. Do they have a job that is linked to the reskilling and upskilling of changing of that job market that we have? And what is the employability rate like at that ultra local level? So I think it's actually looking at all of those individual measures when we're specifically looking at this goal to really find out at that absolute local level, is the levelling up agenda working? And linked to this goal, do people have an understanding of how we are actually getting to net zero, and what's the time frame linked to that, and what's the part that they're playing as part of that journey?
Justine, do you think it's more difficult in this sector to actually measure whether it's working or not? I mean, if we talk about education, you can do that in a number of easily identifiable ways. It's not so easy here, is it?
No, not at all. And it's one of those new areas for levelling up that I don't think we've really thought about in terms of how we measure progress. So there are some macro measures. For example, our energy mix, is that low carbon or not? What's the proportion of our industry, if you like, that's low carbon businesses? You can look at our overall emissions as a country. So I think there are the beginnings of some metrics that you could then take and say, okay, what's that look like at a regional level, for example, or in particular communities? And then I think what's really exciting about what Kerry was just talking about is, there's what we can then do at an organizational level for companies to genuinely say, okay, this is how we're measuring our contribution to a just transition on energy. And I think that's the real prize, because that's what we'll be working on with a company like BP. And you're right, Ian, it was me who passed those gender pay gap regulations. It was. But you've got to remember when we did that, and we did that well into the Davis Commission, well into Hampton-Alexander. And actually, as Kerry's saying, there'd been a huge amount of leadership from business that had very much, if you like, set what that framework could look like. And I think at that stage, it absolutely made sense to say, okay, how can we create a genuine race to the top and have some transparency? I think we're further back in the debate on how you get transparency on levelling up. But, if you listen to people like John Thompson, Chief Exec of the Financial Reporting Council, I mean, literally last month, he said he wants to see companies being more transparent without him having to be prescriptive. And I think that's right. And I think the big opportunity we've got with all of this work on the levelling up goals, working with companies like BP, is to genuinely challenge ourselves to say, well, what do we think the right thing is on transparency? And that's exactly the next stage of the work we've got underway now. I had a really fascinating but also really exciting meeting with the Office for National Statistics. I did say that phrase, an exciting meeting with the Office for National Statistics. And they
You're
are
easily pleased.
well, I'm a data person. I think it's my latent inner accountant I can never quite shake. But there's a real opportunity for us to marry up all of the work they're doing at this national level. I talked about some of the macro stats, and then fuse in all of the thinking that we've been doing, and to sort of pull in some of the thinking about what organizations want to do to be able to monitor their progress and make sure they're having impact. So, we're literally creating all of this measurement and impact tracking as we speak. And I think it can really make sure that companies don't just do the right thing, but they can genuinely demonstrate that to a wider world.
We're coming to the end of our time in a few moments, but I just want to go around each of you and just pick out one thing from our discussion today that you think that people watching or listening should take away from this, things that maybe people ought to think about a little bit more. Robbie, let's start with you.
Well, I'm just going to simply say the change to the market and the opportunities that are associated with that in terms of skills, upskilling, reskilling, and those opportunities that lie down the line for this, further down the line for this.
Kerry?
Thanks, Ian. I think for me, it's about education and access to opportunity. This, achieving net zero is a huge goal in itself, but we should do that in a way that really provides access to opportunity for a wider degree of the population.
Well, that's an interesting one, because I think that virtually every discussion that we've had in the 12 or 13 sessions that we've had in these seminars, they've actually all come back to education in a sense, in one form or another. And is that something that you at BP are really getting into, making sure that you help that process in the education system?
No, absolutely. Because without that, I think, that is the foundation for everything almost in this regard. So whether that's, educating students in opportunity, whether it's demonstrating, what particular careers might look like, there's so many different opportunities, whether it's providing education, reskilling opportunities. We are doing that in many ways. I touched on some of them with the work we've been doing with the Royal Academy for Engineering, with AFS, our partnership. We have a BP Schools education service where we've provided opportunity to a huge number of students. For me, it is the foundation, and I think providing those opportunities and that awareness is what will create the right skills and capabilities we need for the future.
John, what would you like people to take away from this?
Well, I think it's been a really interesting discussion, I've got a lot from hearing Kerry talk about where BP are positioning themselves in this, and I think that for most people is a really striking thing. Seeing seeing how fundamentally seriously an energy giant, traditional oil energy giant like BP is taking net zero, what that means for itself as a company, but what that means for its communities and what that means for the countries and the degree of change which they understand they need to go through. I think that communicates itself to other people about the level of change which everyone is going to need, we're all going to need to embrace.
Justine?
I think what came across to me is fundamentally it's also about leadership. And that leadership isn't just sometimes in a political system, it's outside of it, and it's in some of the most important businesses in the country. And if they're willing to step up to the plate and really think much more creatively about their broader role and where they fit into these big challenges on net zero, on levelling up, actually you get a really exciting agenda emerging, and one that genuinely is a win-win, where you start to fix these challenges, but you also, as Kerry says, end up with a better education system, more opportunities, and people able to fulfill their potential. So yeah, it's that whole thing in, you know, when you're doing the right thing, it is a virtuous circle, and it does all start to just reinforce itself. So I think that's what we're steadily shifting with all of this work, which is why it's so exciting.
Well, thank you to you all. Who knew that energy transition could be so interesting? Thank you very much for taking part in this Levelling Up Goals seminar. Thank you to Robbie Moore, to Kerry Drybrough, to Justine Greening, and to John Woodcock, Lord Walney. We'll be back again with another one of these seminars very, very shortly. Do catch up with all the others on the Levelling Up Goals website. Goodbye.